So I've let this sit for about almost 3 to 4 minutes. So it hasn't been sitting very long, but you can see that there's a ring around my clay. That means the moisture's kind of gotten out into the canvas. So you guys have a rubber rib. That's going to work better for this. And then I just don't have the rubber rib, so I'm going to use the metal one. And I'm going to scrape it up. And you can see it starting to set up a little. And then I might need to use my stick again. I want to put it in a dry spot. But you can see the top part that was, or I guess it would be the bottom part that was sitting on the canvas is starting to get like a skin on it. So it doesn't take very long for it to start to set up. And then again, the rubber rib is going to work so much easier. I just don't have one right now. But you can see I'm kind of mushing this out a little bit, and it's starting to get a little bit stiffer. And so I'm going to use my rib, and now I'm going to kind of flop it. But now it's starting to turn into a more clay-like mass. And so now I can kind of start with my hands. And I want to keep trying to go to dry areas of the canvas. And so right now I can roll it a little bit. And all I'm doing is trying to get the moisture out of that clay. And so I'm kind of doing I wouldn't say a wedge necessarily, but I'm kind of rolling it or kneading it and trying to get some of the moisture out of it. Right now it's too soft to really do much with. So that's why we need to mix it together, kind of let it sit, get some of that moisture to come out. And you can see this big shape from where it was originally sitting. So I already know that I got quite a bit of the moisture out of it. And don't forget, you should be wearing a mask during this part. Even though it's not a dry powder anymore, there may be some powder maybe that I missed. And I don't want that to anybody to breathe any of that in. So now I'm starting to get a little bit more clay-like material. It feels pretty smooth, but it's still really, really soft. But if I just kind of keep working it on the table, and you're not making very much, so that whole cup of powder, and I'm just going to end up with like something like this. So you're making something that's very small. But at the same time, I don't want them to be too ridiculously teeny tiny. Because this self-glazes, it's going to be glossy, potentially, on all the sides of the piece. So it's going to be better if it's a little bit bigger, or at least big enough that I can put it on one of my smallest stilts. So I do have to stilt it in the kiln, and that's a scary thing because I'm not 100% sure if it'll stick to the stilt or not. And so remember that this is an experiment. We're just trying something out. And so I don't want you to freak out, oh, my thing didn't work. It's very possible it could be a huge disaster. This is very possible that when I am finished with all of this, I will have gone through this process and not been able to make anything that was savable. So now I can kind of work it between my hands if I want, just getting some of that moisture out. As you guys know, the more you work with clay, you're going to get that moisture out of the clay, and it's going to stiffen. I can roll it. I can work it into the canvas a little bit more, get some of that more moisture out of it. But it can't be too mushy. If it's too mushy, it's not going to make the shape. So a couple of things that you can do with your Egyptian paste is you can simply just roll out and make a little sculpture. You're not necessarily going to be able to attach parts easily, so I wouldn't try to make anything too elaborate. But you can make a little sculpture with it. I do have some press molds. They showed you in the video that you could use plastic ones. I don't know how well they're going to come out of the mold itself, so I don't know for sure. So I'm going to attempt to use probably the flower one because that's big enough for my stilt. Something like this size down here is iffy. I might be able to get that out and I might not. This one, I probably can't. So they can't be too ridiculously small. And so I'm going to go for one of the bigger ones in here. Now I'm just going to keep working this a little bit longer. It's starting to set up more. And to be real honest, I'm not 100% sure what I'm going for. I just know that it can't be too mushy so that it can come out of the mold. So I got to work it up some more. Now, if you were sculpting, you might be able to pull it and start to sculpt something. So I'm going to take this smaller piece of clay and just kind of roll this one and mush it, try to get a little bit more moisture out of it so that I can put it into my press mold. But now that this is kind of like a hunk of clay, okay, so I'm going to attempt, like I said, I'm going to press this in, and I'm not going to squeeze it all the way down. I want to be able to get it out somewhat. So I'm going to push down so that way I can push it and peel it out. Now, my clay is still really soft, so I have to be careful. So when I did that, I still have some extra clay around the design. So I'm going to grab my needle tool, and I'm going to pull away some of the extra clay I don't want. You could try to put a hole into it so that you could turn it into a charm. But you want to make sure that the hole is big enough that something will go through it, and big enough that something is not going to glaze together, because it's self-glazing everywhere. So it might be better if I just leave it as it is. So there I made something out of the press mold, and now I'm just going to take this, roll it, and I'm going to attempt to just make a little sculpture out of the rest of my clay. So it's not going to be super detailed by any means. And I can tell my clay is still pretty soft because it keeps mushing downward. I'm going to take a little bit off. So if you have to, you might take the clay that you're going to start sculpting with and roll it a little bit more. But see, it's still pretty mushy. So honestly, I think I'm going to break it up into pieces and just kind of keep rolling it. Now, it's not bad if you want to use the press mold, but if you're trying to sculpt something, it's just too soft yet. And you'll be able to tell. From your experience with clay, you're going to be able to tell, like, hey, I can't do this yet. Okay, so I'm going to attempt here to start my sculpture. And it's still pretty mushy. So while I'm waiting for these parts to kind of set up some more, I'm going to go ahead and try another one of these from my press mold. So I'm going to go ahead and press my clay in. See how it's setting up more, so it's a lot easier. But I definitely don't want to press it like too hard into the mold so that I can't get it out. So then I want to push, and then this is where you gotta be real careful. So it's really important that you push and kind of peel. So if you notice, that was a huge disaster. So basically what I did was push it too hard into the press mold, and so now I have to roll it up again. And so this is definitely a different type of material that you're used to working with. Usually if you let clay sit out for a little while, it gets pretty dry right away. This takes a little bit of time because you're absorbing all that moisture out with the canvas. So I'm going to try to press it in there again. I mean, it's better than it was, that's for sure, but it's still not awesome. So I'm going to push out, kind of peel that out of there. Much, much better. So even there, I was just kind of playing around with, is it okay to do it? So now I'm just going to pull this away. And I'm just using my needle tool. I don't think you're going to be able to use the fettling knife if you're using something out of the press mold. It's pretty difficult to do. And you just want to be gentle. That's all I can say is just be gentle. I don't have a ton of colors available to try, but I do have white, I do have green, I do have mauve, and so those are a few things that we can use to get us going with this. So just by leaving it sit for that time, starting to get way, way better. So hopefully now, I kind of roll it, keep squishing it in my hand, I'm absorbing that moisture out of the clay and getting it ready so I can kind of play with it a little bit. All right, so now it's not slumping near like it was. And so I can kind of, and I am not making a detailed sculpture by any means. It is just going to sort of just be people are going to have to use their imagination a little bit when they see it. So I'm attempting to sculpt a little head here. And see how you can't just like smooth it out? Like it makes it all crinkly? So you kind of have to pat it. Okay, and then I'm going to just carve into the surface to pull away some of the clay that I don't want. And that's not going to be easy to do necessarily. So you kind of have to pull it away. And I don't really like how that looks, so I'm just going to smush it back together. So that's what I mean by experimenting and just trying something. So I'm going to take some of my clay here, and so now I'm going to try adding some parts on and see what happens. I don't know. Never really used it too much before, so it's an experiment for all of us. Okay. So hopefully, kind of looks like a really fat cat that's kind of sitting on its butt. And so now I'm going to try to roll out a tail. And I'm just going to pat a little water onto the backside. And I'm going to curl that tail. So as soon as I put water on it, it made it really hard to use. So you got to be careful. You can't use too much of anything. And then I'm just going to use my needle tool. Try to blend that area in. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Maybe the tail will fall off. So there's sort of the tail in the back. And it's kind of sitting in the front. So I'm just going to have its legs pinch away some of this clay. So it's not going to be the most beautiful thing I've ever made in my life. But there's this big fat kitty. And I'm going to try to put 2 arms on the front. And I'm going to call it good. Now your extra clay, I don't think you can save. You could try to save it for a day or so, but I don't really think that's going to work out. Now I didn't use water this time. I just kind of pushed it on. And those legs are a little awkward looking at the top. So this is where I am going to use just a little bit of water and just try to work those legs into the body. Using your wood tool might help. But it's definitely not a clay that you can really attach parts to very easily. Try to get my cat face. So it's a very fat cat. It's got some legs in the front. Got a little tail in the back. And even just like working with it, the stuff's just mushing. So don't get frustrated. Okay. So I'm just going to maybe try to draw on the surface. And I don't know how that's going to work out, honestly. I don't know. I don't really like how it looks, I'll tell you that. But it may all blend together. So my cat keeps mushing down. He keeps getting fatter because the clay is maybe just a little too soft. So I have my really sad looking kitty sculpture, and then I have my 2 press molds. So just from this experience, I would probably say that using the press molds is going to be your best option. But if you keep working with it, it's going to set up more. And so you might be able to do a little bit better sculpting than I did for this demonstration. My extra clay I'm just going to toss. I mean, you could try to put it back in your baggie, but your baggie's pretty gross and nasty. You want to make sure that you throw your cups away. It's not a reusable cup. Your water cup, if you can use that for something else later on in the quarter, definitely do that. So now what I'm going to do is let these dry. So there are drywall boards in the classroom still, and so I'm going to put them on a drywall board and let them dry on there because I don't want to touch them. Okay? Now, this guy is pretty thick, but he's probably not thicker than an inch. So I think we're okay. And I haven't necessarily read how it has to be thinned out or it'll explode. Oh, my poor sad kitty. But we don't want to make anything too terribly big or it'll take a long time for it to dry. So now at this point, I'm going to put them on a drywall board and then I'm going to set them aside, probably on the shelf in the classroom so that they can get air to them. And then you're going to notice that when they dry, they're going to start to crystallize. At least that's what we're hoping for. And then once they're pretty much covered in little crystals, they'll be ready for firing.